take what we saw were certain landscaping requirements being imposed in the industrial park and take an approach where we could relocate those and even enhance those to create buffering against our residential neighbors to our south. And the reason the idea grew internally with us, and which ultimately brought us here to you tonight, was one, again, I mentioned the neighbors were very upset and they wanted some resolution to the buffering, which was not required by code and still isn't required by code, number one. But number two, in examining this industrial park, which is over 100 acres, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the industrial park, over 100 acres, you do not have this ornamental fencing anywhere because of the age of this park, I would imagine is the primary reason. And you didn't have this 4-inch caliber tree requirement. And you don't see that in the park anyplace. So on one hand, we have a code provision that today triggers 4-inch caliber trees for new parking. We have a provision that triggers ornamental fencing, or in the alternative, I think a wall was an option, a partial wall. That will provide, and again, there'll be testimony to this effect, that will provide very little benefit to this long-standing industrial use that's over 100 acres. You pass it in a blink of an eye. Whereas on the other hand, we have this opportunity to address, I think, a real legitimate concern from neighbors who would very much benefit from much of this buffering being moved and redesigned in an alternative landscaping plan for their benefit. And again, I realize that's a little unusual. These opportunities rarely come up in my experience, but it was an opportunity to address something that we thought through a variance process could benefit many, while at the same time addressing a real world limitation in an industrial park where we'd be doing something, quite frankly, out of character with everything else in the industrial park that had been built many years ago on a very large scale. I'm happy to share with you that we've been working closely with some of the community neighbors immediately next to the property. I believe you're going to hear from them tonight, and they're supportive of this approach. And I think you certainly can understand why when I show you the pictures. And they also testified in front of the Planning Commission. So procedurally, getting back to procedure, the Planning Commission did approve the by right plan, so that could be built, upon the pulling of a permit. But they also, that is the Planning Commission, recommended to you all to consider these variances, which would reduce the planting on the new lot, eliminate the reason or the requirement for the fence, the ornamental fencing, and at this, which you'll hear testimony will have a minimal impact at best in this very large industrial park. That will allow us to build approximately 16 additional spaces for Amazon, and at the same time, let us move this landscaping again to our south and to, I guess, our east or southeast to benefit the neighbors. To some extent, we're robbing Peter certainly to pay Paul in this application, just to be very candid. But Peter really wasn't getting much. Paul will really get a lot out of this. Peter was getting a very minimal benefit at best, out of character with the rest of the park, where the immediate neighbors, I think, will be getting a significant benefit. And the pictures are worth 1,000 words, and certainly you get to judge for yourself. But that's my opening, if you will, and my advocacy for this application, which is a rare opportunity for me as a zoning attorney to really have a client work with a community to address two needs at once. One, a client need that's more desirable, and a community need that I think is clearly more desirable. So thank you for bearing with me on that opening. And with that, what I'd like to do is jump to Mr. Ziegler. And I would also ask if possible, if slide 1 of the PowerPoint perhaps could be displayed.
Kim, thank you. Kim, if you could accommodate us. Is that the slide, Mr. Tucker, that says by right plan approved by Planning Commission?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Kim, can you?
I think it's coming up right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Nope, not that one.
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Okay, that one, not the one before that?
No, this is the first one.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. There's another one that's relevant certainly as well, but this would.
All right.
And again, just to orient you before I jump in with Mark, now that we have the picture up, because it is certainly a little confusing. Lot A is the lot that is proposed for new parking. Lot A. A stormwater management pond used to be located there on Lot A. Lot B is a parking lot that already exists today that was built in the past 2 to 3 years. And then Lot C is the most recent stormwater management pond relocation, which is immediately, as you can see with the second water body, up against our residential friends from Washington Park to the southeast. That large pond towards the rear of Lot C, or to the southeasterly side of Lot C, is replacing what used to be a pond at Lot A. So Lot A used to be a pond that has been relocated, and Lot A would now serve, if you will, for Amazon.
Mr. Tucker?
Yes.
Run A, B, and C past me one more time. A is pre-existing.
A is going to be the new parking lot that was approved
Okay.
by the planning commission.
Got it.
Lot B, and that with the cross hatching.
Mhm.
Lot B is an existing parking lot that was built approximately 2 to 3 years ago, I'm told.
Okay.
And Lot C is just finishing up construction with the addition of that large stormwater management pond to the southeast. The other one that looks like a kidney, I understand, had been there for some time. Is that correct?
20 years.
15 to 20 years. So the one that looks like a small kidney, that's been there. The larger one that is more oval in shape to the rear is just been completed, or is in the process of being completed today.
So I just want to make sure that I drove back there. I've been back there a couple times, and I was back there again last night. I want to make sure that I'm oriented correctly here. So as I came in off of 273, the main entrance to Center Point, and made my way to Johnson Way, and went straight back to the properties, would I have encountered, what would I have encountered first? Because then I saw an open space that was being improved. Then I saw a paved lot, and then I saw an area behind that which appeared to have a lot of equipment on it as well.
Sure. So let me walk you through that. So if you were coming in on Johnson Way,
Yep.
off of Airport Road 273, the first thing you would have seen on your immediate left is Lot A, which is currently, I believe, and I was not out there this week, but it has been cleared. The pond is obviously not there anymore, but it has been cleared in anticipation of building the parking lot. But there's not a parking lot there yet.
There's stone.
There's stone. Okay. There is stone there today. To the rear of that property, and you can't see it from Johnson Way, is the rear of the baseball fields. So to the very rear, and I'll show you an aerial that'll help orient you in a moment. But the baseball fields back up, the outfields back up to Lot A. Lot B you would have seen as existing, and it would look relatively new and fresh, with blacktop and parking that extends to the rear residential line that you can see
Right.
on this picture.
Drove that.
And then Lot C would probably have appeared mostly under construction, but almost complete.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yep.
Okay, very good. Very good. So again, A would be is what we're here about, or the two variances we're seeking. The two variances we're seeking are related to A only, but B and C become relevant because of the neighborhood buffering issue that we are trying to address contemporaneously with this application. And you can see those lots from Washington Place in brown in the rear of Lot C in particular, and to a lesser extent behind Lot B. And certainly there are more lots as you go back, and I'm going to show you an aerial in a moment to give you a better flavor. Next slide, please. This is a blow up of Lot A only, and that is the by right plan approved by the Planning Commission. It was in the last slide, but I just wanted to zoom in on that for you for a moment, and I'm going to go back and let Mark and Gary certainly testify to that, but I thought I'd give you the little preview here. And then the third slide, if you would, and then I'll back up. The next slide is an aerial that I think will help put this all in perspective. So in blue is the new Lot A that will be parking, and you can see because this picture is dated, the pond is there that is no longer there today. And you can see the baseball diamonds. And I actually thought we were in the outfield there, but I misspoke. Now that I'm looking at the aerial, it's actually not the outfield. Where I was standing, you couldn't really see the batter up, the home plate. It looked like it was all outfield. So that gives you a sense of the ball fields. And as you go southeast, you can get a better sense of Washington Place, Park, and the residential homes. And that area you see in brown, that's actually an existing parking lot today. And you saw that, Mayor, when you would have gone back on your left.
That's the one that's been repaved. That's Lot B.
That is correct. That is Lot B. And then Lot C, you see in this picture, is very well vegetated. And you see that kidney pond that I mentioned that had been there historically. You can see that on this picture.
Right.
So you can imagine, and I think we'll hear from some of these folks tonight, how surprised they were when a lot of that vegetation went away for the relocation of the pond, even though it's permitted under the code and it was done appropriately. That was a bit of a shock to folks who backed up to that area. And those are the folks we've been working with over the summer to address the loss of that vegetation with what you're going to hear about tonight. Okay. So I just wanted to provide some orientation. I hope that was helpful. You're very welcome. And if I could, with your indulgence, back up to the first slide, because I think Mr. Ziegler will need to testify about that. Okay, thank you. All right. Mr. Ziegler, for the record, could you introduce yourself to the board, and can you tell us what you do for a living?
Good evening. My name is Mark Ziegler, and I'm a professional engineer and also the owner of McBride Ziegler. And our firm does land development plans and surveying, site engineering.
And approximately how long have you worked as a civil engineer, and are you licensed in Delaware?
I'm licensed in Delaware, and I've been employed at MNC for 33 years.
Okay. And did you assist in the creation of a plan for a new parking lot on what is depicted or what is described as Lot A on the PowerPoint presentation currently up?
Yeah, our firm prepared the site construction plans for the parking lot on Lot A.
Okay. And did you consult with a landscape architect as well during your preparation of that plan?
Yes, we consulted with Bertram and Associates and worked directly with Gary Bertram.
Okay. And I want to walk you through the variances briefly that we're seeking this evening for at least for the board's consideration. And there are two, correct?
Correct.
And you heard them, I think, announced at the beginning of the hearing.
Yes,
Correct?
I did.
Okay, so let's walk through them briefly. And if I could ask for the next slide, please.
Mr. Tucker, it might be helpful. I don't want to tell you how to do your presentation, but I've looked through the materials. I've read the materials. What I would also find helpful would be if you would cite that which is required in the current Newcastle City Code, and then that which you're seeking a variance from.
Understood, Mayor. I will. I'll structure it that way, and I appreciate the fact that you've already read or taken a close look at our materials that we've submitted. So, Mr. Ziegler, let me start with the first variance that we're seeking this evening, and essentially what that is a variance from 230-28G1 of the Newcastle City Code to permit construction of a 26-inch contiguous evergreen hedge along Johnson's Way without a steel ornamental fence where the city code would otherwise require an ornamental fence. Can you point to the board the location approximately, and this will be a little challenging with the Zoom video, of where that fence is required by code and actually was approved by the Planning Commission?
That fence would be adjacent and contiguous to Johnson Way, roughly.
Counselor, is that the heavy black line that is depicted in the picture?
Yes, that the cursor is pointing to the appropriate areas along Johnson Way. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that would be the variance, the first variance we're seeking, Mayor and board members. And then the second variance relates to a requirement in the very next section of the city code that would require the installation of 49 4-inch caliper shade trees in this entire parking area that you see on the screen. Mr. Ziegler, can you give the board an idea of where those plantings would go? And I think we have a colorized drawing, but just can you confirm that that drawing matches the location those plantings would go?
So those trees, you'll see several landscaped islands. Within those islands are trees, 2 trees per island, and also along the perimeter of the parking lot, you'll see trees also. So that's where the 49 trees by right, or the 49 trees would be planted.
Okay. All right. Now, is ornamental steel fencing, to the best of your knowledge, located any place else within this industrial park?
No.
And can you share with the board how Centerpoint is attempting to mitigate this variance if it were granted this evening? And when I say this variance, let's start with the fence and then let's migrate to the plantings.
The mitigation essentially is right now where the landscaping is located and where the fence would be located by right would be almost basically at the end of a cul-de-sac. It's not really a defined cul-de-sac, but it's in an area that's not visible to anybody but the employees in the Amazon building. Along with the fence, along the boundary of Washington Park so that it benefits the residents of Washington Park. So it'll essentially be on what we showed on our previous slide along parcel B and parcel C.
Okay. If I could trouble our assistant to back up the slide, one more slide. There we go. So Mr. Ziegler, this is the by right plan. Let's jump into the alternative plan. And that is, and just bear with me, I apologize. If we could go to slide 4, please, that will show the alternative plan. Okay, very good, thank you. So Mr. Ziegler, I'm gonna point you to slide 4, which is labeled Exhibit A, Alternative Landscaping Plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the plan that the Planning Commission recommended the board consider tonight?
This is the plan.
Okay. And you mentioned moving or relocating some of the plantings and the fencing in particular. Can you describe where the fencing would go in the alternative if these variances were granted?
So the fencing would be placed along the easterly side of the existing parking lot, and that fencing would be proposed there. It would be actually a wood or vinyl fence, 6 feet high, and it was placed there because it would help screen the residents from the existing parking lot. And that's also where the landscaping is now being proposed. And if you move over to the south into parcel C, you'll see again significant landscaping being proposed along that entire line that's contiguous to Washington Park. So essentially when it grows, it'll be a substantial screen from for the residents of Washington Park looking into Centerpoint Business Park.
Okay. And then just—
So Mr.
Okay.
Tucker, if I could. So I want to make sure, so I'm looking at this and I see where the by right fence was located, the heavy black line on contiguous to Johnson Way. I'm trying to determine from this map, is it the dashed line between the trees leading to the retention pond? Is that the proposed location for the fence, or where is it? I'm having a difficult time seeing exactly where you're gonna put it.
I understand. I was actually going to back the truck up a little bit with Mr. Ziegler and have him drill down into that very question because I knew that was coming.
Okay, sorry.
No. It's you and I are thinking exactly the same way because when he said it, I knew it wasn't specific enough for somebody who has not seen this plan before us. Mr. Ziegler, when you look at what's marked on this slide as the existing parking lot, that's lot B, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. When you move to the rear of lot B, do you see the dashed line and it kind of gets lost a little bit in the vegetation?
Yeah, it's a little hard to see because there's also other dash lines, but essentially it's the dashed line that is it between the edge of the parking lot and the proposed trees. It is hard to see. It's even hard for me to see.
So your cursor that was just in that rear quadrant had it, there we go. Where's it blow up? There we go. So you will, yeah, a little bit more, probably, there we go.
Right.
So you see a dashed line through there, just off of the parking field.
Roughly 5 feet off the edge of parking.
And that would be the 6-foot tall fence. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that would be the entire length of the rear of the existing parking lot. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that fence would also flow north. I'm sorry, it would flow probably west up into the parking field a bit on both sides.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
right.
correct?
It basically creates a cup around the parking lot to shield the parking lot from the residents. So between that and the proposed landscaping, I think it's going to be a very effective screen.
So it's not.
Mr. Tucker, question. So if I were standing in the center of Lot B, looking towards the homes in Washington Park, and I'm going to say this 2 different ways to impress the point. If I were standing there looking towards the properties in Washington Park, I would see under this proposal, first a fence, and on the other side of that fence would be vegetation.
Yes.
Conversely, if I were any of those property owners in Washington Park, I would be looking at vegetation first, and only looking through the vegetation would I see then the fence, and I'm unlikely to see the pavement or the parking lot.
That is correct with one important clarification. The fencing will only be behind the existing parking lot. The fencing does not migrate all the way over to C. We use additional plantings there offset because there's more room to plant there than there is behind the existing parking. So we use a combination of fencing and planting behind the existing parking lot because of that tight squeeze there between the parking lot and residential, and because there's an easement there for the line that's related to stormwater management that we can't plant directly on top of.
It also seemed to slope down pretty dramatically from the back of that parking lot to the properties.
That is exactly right. There's about a 4 to 5 foot grade delta, so that when you put up the 6-foot fence, I can proffer, because I've already discussed this with Mr. Ziegler and Mr. Burcham, you're actually looking at probably closer to a 9-foot height delta that will further enhance that shielding that is going to happen between the residential homes directly behind the existing parking lot and the parking field.
Okay. Talk to me about the fence for a minute. You said wood or vinyl. How tall? And I'm envisioning, I could come up with in my head several different types of fencing. So please share with me the kinds of fencing that you're envisioning and how tall would it be.
So we've discussed that with our immediate neighbors, or the ones that have engaged us next door. We actually had a meeting with about a dozen at the bottom of 13th Street there about 2 weeks ago. And what our understanding is, and we think you'll hear testimony on this tonight, is the folks who have engaged would like the vinyl option, not the wood option, which we've agreed to do. They would like an earth tone color, not a white color, which we've agreed to do. We've given them that choice. And its height would be 6 feet. So that would be the nature of the fence, unless we hear differently tonight during the comment period. I believe that's where we landed the plane with our neighbors.
Thank you.
Sure, certainly. And Perhaps it would be helpful just for efficiency, Mr. Ziegler, perhaps Mr. Bertram could also jump in here and slide into the picture. Yeah, just to slide over closer to me, I think would probably work. And I'd ask Mr. Bertram to start explaining to the board now that we've covered the landscaping behind the existing parking lot, talk a little bit more about the double row and offset row of landscaping that goes south directly behind other lots in Washington Park and that new pond. Could you give the board an idea of how many plantings are included and the species and your reason for the offset or double plantings in that area?
By the way, my name is Gary Bertram. I'm a registered landscape architect here in Delaware. I've operated Bertram & Associates Landscape Architects since 1989. And
Gary, for the record, can you spell your last name?
that's B as in boy, U-R-C-H-A-M as in mother.
Okay, I asked that, and I want to make clear for any of our neighbors that while it sounds an awful lot like our city building official's last name, these are completely different last names and there is no family relationship. Am I correct or am I incorrect?
Yeah, I've never met Jeff other than out on the site looking at the existing.
Yeah.
The question I asked was, are you related by family?
No, not at all.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Are you his brother by another mother? Something like that.
Okay.
That's a no. That's a no, right, Gary?
Right, exactly.
And Mayor, your concern is well placed because ironically, when I first spoke to one of the neighbors and offered to have her and her neighbors, her other neighbors, meet with Gary Bertram, she thought I said Jeff and thought she'd be meeting with the building official in the field to talk about landscaping and was, I think, no offense to Jeff, happily surprised to meet Gary instead, who knows quite a bit about landscaping. So
Very good. Proceed.
Just to clarify on that fence, on the proposed fence, if you start over on the left-hand side where there's the notch out for the parking in one direction and then parking from the other, it starts there at that corner and angles over to a point that is 5 feet off of the rear curve, the eastern curve, and it runs continuously along parallel to that curve. And then it gets to the far end of that space of parking, which has 9 spaces and then an island and then another 9, and it angles again. So what you're doing is, as Mark suggested, you're creating something of a cup that envelops the top of the parking lot. To take advantage of the elevational differences that you have between the property line and the parking lot, so that the 6 feet that you're going to have with the fence itself will be augmented by the 5 or so feet of elevational difference between the property line and where that fence is located. So in effect, you will have from that property line, you'd be looking up 11 feet to the top of the fence, more or less, 10 or 11 feet. And as you also accurately stated, what you will see from that property line and from the neighbor's side is the fence broken up visually by the plants that are to the outside of that fence, so that you're not looking at this long sheer run of fence. You have small little visible spots of it, but it'll be well broken up so that the mast is not completely visible.
Fence
Now,
run vertical or horizontal?
I'm sorry?
Does the fence run vertical or horizontal?
It needs to be, we haven't selected it yet. You mean in terms of the flanking to it?
Correct. I mean, aesthetically, wouldn't it be, and I'm not a landscape architect, let me just put that out there, but would it not look aesthetically better if it were also vertical
I would
That-
think so, but.
I would think so too, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would agree with that. From that fence, moving southward, which is towards the right, as Sean mentioned, we're going to be putting in a double line of screening that will be composed of largely native species to the area. That was one of the things that Michael McConnell wanted to have us institute. And it's going to be composed of plants, evergreens that are going to get quite large over time. The species that we're going to be using would be Norway spruce, eastern white pine. Where we get into some moist soils, we're going to end up needing to use the loblolly pine because that's one of the few evergreen species that's tolerant of moist conditions. And then once we get over closer to the pond that's under construction, we're going to be getting into some subsoils where we've done some cuts in order to create that stormwater management pond. And so there I'm using some species that are native, but are tolerant of more successional type of situations, shortleaf pine and Virginia pine, that I think should be able to thrive there.
So Gary, let me ask you another question. So the species that you've chosen, given the slope delta that Mr. Tucker described before, do these have roots that go down? Do they spread out? And also, how wind resistant are they?
Where you're talking about near the fence, is that where I'm?
Well, just in the general area, because I mean, if these trees, do get tall and they, we forecast out 10, 15 years from now,
Right.
if we get a storm, it would be better now to avoid a circumstance where someone's got a tree in their backyard.
Right. I don't foresee that happening. If the trees are in good health and you don't get any root rot, then trees shouldn't topple. It's usually only in wet situations where you get trees that start to get root rot and lose portion of their roots, and so they no longer have the capability to anchor the tree properly. Of course, there's always the derecho winds that can come along and topple virtually anything, and there's no real accounting for that.
Very good, thank you. So you're thinking these are conifers as opposed to deciduous trees?
Absolutely. The idea here is to create a dense visual screen that over time will virtually obscure any views into the industrial park from the neighboring properties. Part of this is also being done on Lot A. We are also doing some evergreen screening to the left side, which is the northeast corner of Lot A, where the proposed parking is. So what is proposed on the subject property isn't just the 13 canopy trees and the evergreen hedging along Johnson Way, but we're also proposing screening where there might be views into the parking lot from the ball fields, if you understand where I'm speaking of. So totally what we're proposing then is the 13 shade trees and 101 evergreens, as opposed to the 49 shade trees that would otherwise be required. So we're doing significantly more planting, albeit at smaller sizes, but a lot more, and it will certainly be much more beneficial for the community at large then the planting would be within the parking lot itself.
And Mr. Bergstrom, I think you gave us a great segue there to talk about the caliper, the size of the tree stem, if you will, or its trunk, and your professional opinions about planting sizes when you start out in a new area. What are your feelings about starting out with a 4-inch caliper tree, any place in the county or the state for that matter?
I would not recommend it.
And can you explain, take your time and explain that? I've certainly heard that before, but maybe the board has not. And I think it's important for folks to understand why that is an issue.
Okay. You have to understand that when a tree is transplanted, a significant portion of its root system that supports the tree not only physically anchors it, but also brings in nutrients and water to the plant, is severed. And the larger the tree, the larger percentage of the root system is severed. And once that happens, that tree is in dire circumstances, and it tries to reestablish its root system. So even though a 4-inch caliper tree gets put in, it may have insufficient roots to support the tree. So the chances of that tree dying are much greater than using a smaller tree. The establishment period for trees is generally considered to be 1 year for every 1 inch of caliper of the installed tree. And what the establishment period is the period when the tree is actually sitting in its new location, having severed roots, and it is trying to reestablish a root system that can support the canopy that it has. And when I say support, I'm talking in terms of transpiration of water and nutrients, as well as anchoring the tree. And so for 4 years, that tree, even though it's 4 inches, may just sit there and not really grow as we would know it. Certainly the root system would be growing, but the rest of the tree would not necessarily be growing much. Whereas a 2-inch caliper or 1.5-inch caliper tree, the percentage of its root system is that's severed is less than what would be done on a 4-inch caliper tree. And the establishment period would be, once again, based on the caliper, a year, year and a half, 2 years, and then that tree would start growing. So in just a few years, the tree that is initially put in at 1.5 to 2-inch caliper may very well likely be as big as that 4-inch caliper tree by the time they start growing. Another thing about the 4-inch caliper trees is that you have an immense root ball. The minimum root ball size, according to American Association of Nursery Standards, for a 4-inch caliper tree is 42 inches. Now that's 3.5 feet wide. And if you go by proper planting procedures, then the pit for that tree needs to be 2 times the size of the root ball, which means that you're creating a circular pit 7 feet in diameter in order to accommodate that tree. Conversely, a 1.5 to 2-inch caliper tree would have a reasonable root ball and a much more reasonable sized pit that needs to be dug. As far as planting on any slopes, the 4-inch caliper tree is just unwieldy. The amount of soil you would need to bring in order to establish that tree would just be quite large.
Mr. Bergstrom, if I could, I want to move things along a little bit, understand the difference and thank you for all that. Let me ask you, I looked up the loblolly. I looked up the Virginia pine. What was the other species you identified?
Shortleaf, eastern white pine, the Norway spruce.
Right. And then what, at planting, how tall would these be approximately?
5 to 6 feet is what they're specified as on the drawings.
Understand. And are they fast growing, slow growing? What are they?
They're all reasonably fast growing, yes.
So about a foot a year, 18 inches a year, 6 inches a year, 3 inches a year
Probably in the 1 to 2 feet range.
per year.
Yes.
Okay. And what's generally the price? I understand if you're buying several, you're going to get a different price than if you were to buy, if I were a homeowner and I was buying 1 or 2 trees.
Right. Just on a basic cost, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $90.
Okay. Let me ask you this, and I'm going to exhaust my knowledge of anything related to arbor tree science, etc. But why not Leland cypress? They seem to fill out. From top to bottom, they grow quite wide. They grow big. They provide. These species tend to look as if they are kind of. They have a nice hardy trunk, but they are fuller at the top and maybe less so at the bottom.
Well, actually, that's part of what we've been discussing with the neighbors.
Okay.
The selection of the species.
Okay. Okay. And do they have a view?
Yes, and what we're thinking is that the first line of defense that runs closest to the property lines, we may very well use the Leyland cypresses.
Okay. Okay.
So that what you have is something that's really fast growing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 feet a year. And then the second line is the trees that eventually will get larger and more long-lived.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks. Anything else?
Yes, Mayor, if I may, just a couple more questions for Mr. Bergstrom. Gary, you were about to talk about the character, I think a little bit of the area along Johnson Way before I focused you more on the plantings. Would you mind circling back for a moment to your thoughts about that? In your opinion, are these what I'll call newer code provisions as applied to Johnson Way beneficial along that area of Johnson Way in a material way compared to the character of the entire park as it sits? I'd like to get your opinion on that. Is this a home run for the industrial park if we follow the code? Is it a single? Is it a triple? And then I want you to compare and contrast that to what you're proposing in your plan for our immediate residential neighbors, if you would, please.
Right. I don't really see a whole lot of value in the ornamental fence along Johnson Way. The entirety of the industrial park just simply does not have the kind of visual screening that is required under the code. There's very few shrubs that do any screening of parking lots, and certainly no ornamental metal fences that exist in that industrial park. So this, in a sense, is sort of a foreign element that's being brought in. In certain places of the city of Newcastle, it makes a lot of sense. In this particular location, it really does not aesthetically. As for what we are planning to do or intending to do is to eliminate the fence at Johnson's Way, which we don't really see having a whole lot of benefit, and moving and doing fencing where it will have a lot of benefit. And using a type of fence that will bring benefit to the community at large, to the east of the site by visually screening the parking lot. It will provide some sound reduction, since you'll have a massive fence that has some mass to it in order to stop sound. And those were two of the things that the neighbors had mentioned that was bothersome about the existing parking lot. Was the view of the cars, the headlights that they would see, and any noise that would be coming from that parking lot. A solid fence located up at the top of the hill there where we proposed it will take care of all of those problems.
Very good, thank you.
Thank
I'd also like, Mr. Lasko, Mr. Bergstrom, I'm going to ask you at the appropriate time, when the code provision was, when these requirements were installed, or when they were placed in the city code. My quick scrub suggests that it was like 2004 or 2007, but I'd like your opinion on that when we get to you. Okay, Mr. Bergstrom or Gary, anything else?
If I could, Mayor, just real quick, clean up a couple of items. Gary, could you talk about how your plan provides cutoff of lighting on the fixtures so as to avoid light migration off-site?
That was one of the other things that Mr. McConnell assented to was, and in fact, I believe that's already being done. Yes, it's being done right now, where the existing lights within the existing parking lot on parcel B, those are located on poles that are probably, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 feet high, and there is no it's not a cutoff fixture. And one of the complaints of the neighbors is also that there's light migration off the site from those fixtures. And what the McConnells are doing is retrofitting those lights and putting cutoffs on them so that light will not go beyond the property line on the existing parking lot. And where it's going to be in the new parking lot, of course, they're going to start off with cutoff fixtures to begin with, so that you will not have light migrating off the property.
That's helpful, because I noticed the lights, the stanchions in the in lot B are pretty tall.
Yes.
And just one other cleanup item, if I may, Mayor. Mr. Bergstrom, did Mr. Ziegler talk to you about utilities that run along Johnson Way?
The base plan that I received from McBride and Ziegler has quite a few utilities that are running right along Johnson Way. And one of the things that had to be decided for this was where to put the fence along Johnson Way. And based on the proximity to existing utilities, the fence along Johnson Way for the by right plan is proposed right along that the parking, which is not the best situation for it. Bringing it downhill brings it closer to utilities, which could cause an accident should those utilities, or require removal of a fence should those utilities ever need to be addressed. Having it up near the parking poses other problems, such as snow removal. And also, I suspect when somebody driving a large pickup truck backs into one of those spots, that he's going to be hitting that fence, and that's going to be a real maintenance problem over time.
Thank you, Mr. Bergstrom. Board members, I don't know if you had any additional questions
Mr. Lasko?
in the evening, if there are any, or Mr. Ziegler. And if not, I was going to have Mr. McConnell answer a few questions for the record, if that would be okay.
Let me ask, before proceeding, so Mr. Lasko, do you have any questions?
I do, one or two, but I'll first point out that it looks like this code provision that they're seeking a variance from was adopted in 2004, at least according to what my code book says. Here's my question. I didn't quite follow the train of thought on that idea that fencing along Johnson Way would interfere with utilities. I assume what you mean there is that if the road had to be dug up or the edge of the road had to be dug up to address utilities, it might interfere with the fence. Is that right?
Right, and you'd need to, take out the fence and then do your utility work, and it just becomes a costly and
I couldn't hear that.
Oh, I said that based on its proximity to the utilities, it could pose a problem in the future should utilities need to be addressed down along the road, because you need to move the fence in order to dig out for those utilities if they needed to be fixed in any way. And also, my attempt was to move the fence away from those utilities to the extent that we could, because it's never good to be digging around utilities.
Delasco, anything else?
Yes, if you move the fence further away from the utility lines, how does that interfere with snow plowing work? I didn't follow that.
Because you had to move it closer to the parking lot.
Okay. Doesn't the
As
snow plow just avoid the fence when it's plowing? See, that's what I'm not following.
well, there's the massive snow that gets pushed out that can damage the fence.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Mr. Athey?
Your Honor, just one question. I think I know the answer to it. So maybe I'll make it a statement, ask you to affirm it. One of the things we always look at the Board of Adjustment is could the variance being sought be avoided, and if the location of that new stormwater pond is driving a lot of this, could it not have been done differently? And I see there is that, I'll call it a finger of wetlands kind of going from south to north in a very inopportune location, pretty much bisecting the property. I guess it's possible some sort of a, not a kidney shape, maybe more like a more pronounced C shape could have been done. But were there any efforts made to get that basin farther away from those properties in Washington Park?
Yes, this is Mark Ziegler speaking again. We located the basin because primarily of the wetlands, also because of the grades. The grades there are up enough that we can get the capacity to basically accommodate. We're basically relocating the drainage of 17.3 acres. The current basin that's next to the post office has 17.3 acres. And I think one point of significance, and Mr. Athey, I'm going to try to answer your question in 2 seconds here. That basin drains into Washington Park right now. So it's a very bad drainage situation. So we're eliminating 17 acres of drainage that's going into Washington Park and redirecting it into the basin. The reason we chose that location, and we met also with Soil Conservation and DENREC, where we met directly with Randy Greer. And this was the optimum location because of grades, in order to get the capacity in the basin and also to stay above the floodplain and avoid the wetlands.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, just to drill down a little bit more, since Mr. Ziegler brought up a little bit of that history, which actually I think does go certainly to part of the legal standard. Was there a flooding history or a fear of flooding history that was driving in part the relocation of this pond? That was a city issue, not just an Amazon needing parking issue.
There was an ongoing issue for the past 5 years. I know that I was contacted by the owner, and I think even Jeff Bergstrom, Mr. Bergstrom called me a few times because the existing basin was flooding into Johnson Way, also flooding towards the ball fields. So it was a bad situation.
And does the relocation of the pond to the south resolve that, in your opinion?
Put it this way, when we approached DENREC, they were very pleased, and I think Mr. Bergstrom was very pleased to see that we were relocating 17 acres of drainage away from Washington Park and into and underneath a railroad culvert that drains into the marsh of a tributary of Army Creek.
Mr. Ziegler, it's Mike Quaranta again. I want to make sure that everybody has a sense of scale and context here. I think you said 17.6 acres is a substantial amount of ground. Do you have any idea how big the entirety of the Washington Park neighborhood is? I think that'll help put some context around that for the neighbors, because I'm going to guess that the entirety of Washington Park, I'm going to hazard a guess, is probably no more than about 40 or 50 acres, maybe not even that much.
I think that's a fair, I'm going to tell you, I think that Washington Park is probably about what you just said, 40 or 50 acres. I don't have the acreage.
Maybe Mr. Bergstrom knows, I don't know. But I mean, so to put it into context, if you had a 17-acre plot and the water that rained and fell on that property, you would be channeling it all into one place. So if you overlaid that over the entirety of Washington Park, it would cover a substantial amount of the existing homeowners and properties in Washington Park.
That is 100% correct. And let me just say this also. If we were to propose that basin instead of the parking lot, if we were to propose that basin today next to the post office, it could never get approved the way it is today. Because right now it drains into and parallel with 14th Street into a swale. And then it makes a right angle and goes into a culvert. You would never, ever get that approved today. So this is a correction that I think the city of Newcastle and DENREC and Soil Conservation Service wholly embraced because of the improvement it makes to the drainage out in Washington Park.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to say to our neighbors, the logical question is, well, pardon me here for the colorful language. Why the hell did that ever get allowed to happen in the first place? I wasn't here. I don't think many of us were, but whatever the code and the regulations may have been, and the best of thinking, perhaps when that was placed originally, I have no insight whatsoever from a couple of decades ago when they would have done that. But it would be a shame not to correct either that which was a mistake or that which we live and learn. So I'm pleased to hear that the remediation that you guys are proposing will have what we hope to hear, and I'll ask Mr. Bergstrom when it's his turn, the hopefully net positive benefits that'll have for those homeowners.
Thank you, Mr. Losco. There are, Mayor, there's a couple more loose ends. I think for the record, I need to clean up to cross my T's and dot my I's a bit. And if I may, I'll try to do that quickly with Mr. McConnell with a handful of questions. Obviously, there's a lot of history here. There's a lot of different things going on here. I appreciate your patience in trying to piece this together for you this evening. So you have all.
Good evening, everyone.
Mike, could you state your full name for the record and tell us who you work for?
Yes, Michael McConnell with McConnell Development.
Okay, and can you tell us who owns Centerpoint Industrial Park?
Yes, it's owned by my father, Paul McConnell, and Linda McConnell. I have I kind of co-ownership of the majority of the properties, and there's a handful of private owners as well. For Spurs Logistics, Nixon in the back as well, Ultrachem.
And you heard me represent it as part of my opening that this industrial park is probably over 100 acres. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's like 150-ish.
Okay. And is it fair to say that it's substantially built out today?
It's basically, there's no more undeveloped lots in the whole park.
Okay. And is Amazon one of your tenants?
Yeah, so they've been a tenant of ours for about 20 years. We built the building that's on the trustees' property right there off of 273. We built for them in the early 2000s, and they've taken another facility in the rear of the park. And I know we're all quite proud of, because the facility off of 273 is the first East Coast Amazon. Have their tenancy, I think, for both ourselves and for the municipality as well.
And did there come a time in the past year or so where Amazon advised you as landlord that they needed more parking?
Yes.
And did you agree to provide that to them?
Yeah, so we were trying to solve both their immediate parking need, and I think everyone has followed just really the evolution of industrial and warehousing in Newcastle from being, our park was built to service Boxwood Auto Plant. As that's changed, now a park that services a lot of the e-commerce world, and Amazon's growth has been, it's self-evident.
And you heard me mention I proffered in my opening, the timing was of the essence here for them because of the seasonal nature of their business. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, so every year it's always pushed towards their peak season. I'm sure other folks who are on the call tonight have dealt with them fielding calls. They call Blanca, they call ourselves. There's always a push for more peak parking as well. So our goal is to have this parking facility ready for them for peak.
And when would that be?
It's really mid-October or so. It'll start gently, and then through there all the way through January.
Okay. And approximate age of your existing industrial park?
Late 80s was when it started in the front, and then the last building was built in the old bottling plant was 1500 Johnson Way, which was in 2000, 2001.
Okay. And is it fair to say the character of your industrial park is in fact an industrial park character?
Yes.
And to the best of your memory and knowledge, did you have to comply with standards otherwise in the code when you built those other improvements over the past several decades? And by that, I mean this 4-inch caliber requirement, the ornamental fence requirement, or the half wall, and the alternative, I think, was an
No,
option.
those are very much unaligned with the character of the business park.
As it exists today.
Correct.
Okay. And could you briefly tell or share with the board why you're seeking these two variances this evening?
Yes, I think it's twofold. One is the functionality of the proposed parking lot. Right now, with the increased number of islands, increased number of trees, it's not as functional. Also, two, there's no benefit to either my industrial tenants or for the adjacent neighbors, as the kind of code speaks to us today. And then going on to the ornamental fence, I think Gary made a point about the utilities, and I think I really like to stress. That the fence as it sits today sits over the 4-inch high pressure gas line, which right now we're locating by hand digging, and it's a very tenacious situation. There's also the 480 volt power coming as well into the post office. There's also a series of 3 different utilities coming perpendicular into this as well. It's probably one of the most crowded utility locations in the whole business park. So obviously it's an uncomfortable situation where we have to dig. And also then that ornamental fence is really out of the characteristic with the rest of the park. We're quite proud of the aesthetic of the park, and we believe it's a Class A industrial park here in Northern Delaware. It helps us attract the caliber of tenants that benefit the whole municipality. And that's something we've worked really hard to maintain and continue.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. I didn't know if the board had any other questions for my client.
I do. This is Michael Quaranta. Mr. McConnell, curious if there's been any discussions with the Amazon leadership and whether this parking lot or any parking lot that you guys have would accommodate this. It was announced in September, on September 19th of 2019 that Amazon purchased 100,000 electric Rivian vans. They expect all of those to be delivered by 2024, but the first tranche to hit the road, according to 2 news stories that I've read, in 2021. That on its own would create a real net benefit for the neighbors in that it would be much, much quieter. I don't know if they intend to place any of those vehicles at their facilities in Newcastle, and if they did, are you contemplating, are you putting infrastructure in that could conceivably, because for public disclosure, I have a completely electric vehicle, and it is absolutely silent, as you would expect it to be. And that could be a real benefit to the neighbors because there would be a reduction in noise. Do you have any insight into that, or do you have any thoughts about any infrastructure that could be put in place should Amazon make a choice to place some of those vehicles at this location?
Yeah, so I don't have any insight into whether or not electric vehicles will be deployed at this location. We have about 300,000 square feet of Amazon space of the kind of 300 million or so they have. So they don't really keep us that in the loop of what their plans are, even improvements they're doing in their space. Kind of happen at their speed. But we do have the infrastructure in place, the power there. If there was a need to put in charging stations, the site could accommodate that.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
The robust utilities that are there right on the corner of the property.
Very good. Okay. Mr. Athey or Mr. Lasko, any last questions?
No questions for me.
Mr. Athey?
No, I think we both talked over each other. No, I have nothing further at this time.
Okay, nothing, no other further questions from the for the applicant. Mr. Tucker, does that conclude your presentation?
I would like to briefly wrap up out of an abundance of caution, if that would be okay, just to click off the legal standards. I did submit some material, but I thought I would do a quick overview if we have enough time.
Yes, if you would move quickly, that'd be great.
Okay, I will do so. Next slide, please. I won't walk people through the actual submission on the legal analysis, but if I could go back to the slide, I think I can sum up on a couple of final slides here. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. Okay. As I had mentioned, the Planning Commission back in July did support the alternative plan and encouraged us to keep working with the community to better develop that. And we have, and as you heard earlier, you're going to almost certainly hear from some of those folks this evening. Mr. Bergstrom actually made reference to the fact that some of the planting types and the plants that would grow faster are being discussed with our neighbors. In addition, I will share there are additional plantings that we've promised. We didn't want to complicate things even further by introducing a third version of this plan tonight, but I will share with you certainly that privately, we've agreed to put in additional plantings beyond what you've already seen this evening. For example, at the end of 13th Street. We didn't put them on the initial plan because there was a telephone pole that's being removed. So we're doing things privately as well with folks. We've agreed, and I will put this on the record, to enter into a perpetual maintenance agreement, just to ensure that if there's any death with these plantings, they will be replaced in appropriate times of the year, and that the fence would be maintained in the event of storm damage. I think there was a concern understandably raised tonight about what if a tree falls over. We're going to repair and replace trees. We're going to repair and replace and maintain that fence in perpetuity. And we've agreed to enter into private agreements with interested neighbors to assure them that will happen. So we really, I think my client has really acted in good faith and worked hard with its neighbors over the past couple of months to try to address the concerns that we've heard about. Next slide, please. And just to recap, the two variances are listed that we seek here this evening. You see that purple circle that identifies the frontage along Johnson Way regarding where the ornamental fence would be required, that we're proposing to look elsewhere, and in fact, a 6-foot, not an ornamental. Next slide, please. And just to talk about the quick check standards and the city supplemental standards that are in your code, and I'll move through this quickly. I don't want to belabor it because it's covered in the memo I submitted, and I know we've taken on a lot of time this evening. In a nutshell, I think you've heard clear and convincing evidence this evening that the existing industrial park, being over 100 acres in size, is essentially built out. And none of that park was subject to the current standards based on the testimony, which include this ornamental fence component option, as well as this much larger, higher caliper tree size. And so, ironically, in this instance, when you're dealing with a completed or almost completed industrial park, you're proposing something, or the code's introducing something that is actually out of character. You could argue that it's better, certainly, but it would be out of character with how this park has developed over decades. Certainly, if this was new development and a new building, there would be more room to work with here. But we're really supplementing existing construction with a new parking lot to address a tenant's need that has come to our attention. So if you look at the character of the area, the nature of the area, and the zone that we're in, industrial, putting in these new code or newer code requirements, I should say, since 2004, are actually out of character with the immediate area. However, relocating them, that is plantings and the fence, and modifying them to address our neighbors to the south and the east, I think the testimony was clear. We believe will have a significant benefit. Alternative, not only for us, but for our neighbors. One, it would provide an opportunity for more parking that's badly needed. But more importantly, I think for our neighbors, it would provide the buffering that was otherwise not required by code that we are creating here, both through this approval process and through a private agreement with our neighbors that we've negotiated in terms of at least the key terms, subject to certainly tonight's action. So, you know, when you look at a big picture here and you look at the quick check standards, this is not a situation that we created on our own in terms of the fact that this park built out naturally over time. This new code provision or newer code provision comes along, sort of changes the rules. That's fine, but they really don't fit well in this instance. But an adaptation of them, or an alteration of them, if you will, as we propose, really will, we think, further advance the spirit and intent of the code, particularly in regard to our residential neighbors. You also heard testimony that we had a significant relocation of a pond here that also benefits the public. And certainly Mr. Bergstrom, I think, can add to that, Jeffrey, about what the city's history with that was. But you heard Mr. Ziegler talk about that, and the 17 acres that we're draining into this pond, that was a non-code compliant pond because it was probably grandfathered in because of its age, as Mr. Lasco, I think, presumed, which I think he presumes correctly. This pond was probably built at a time before there were significant standards. Could not be built today, which tells you a lot about it, and has now been relocated to the south. And of course, today it's built, it has to meet code. So that's also a significant improvement here. So when I started off, I said it's really a win-win. It truly is a win-win. It's a win for the city because of the new pond that's been created and the redirection of water that historically had gone through Washington Park, which was less than ideal. I'll let Mr. Bergstrom expand on that. You've got a client who needs to support a tenant in an industrial context where he needs more parking, and we're able to provide that better and more effectively through this variance. And last but not least, perhaps just as important, if not more important in the eyes of many, buffering for our neighbors that wasn't otherwise required by code that we can rectify here tonight. So for all those reasons, we would respectfully ask that the board consider granting the 2 variances this evening that we've requested. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Mr. Bergstrom, your view of all of this, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. when I got here in 1991, one of my first interactions with a member of our business community was with Mr. McConnell, asking him how in the world this pond was ever permitted in the first place. And the short answer is, in a peak storm, in a 100-year storm, it puts over twice as much water into the pipe that carries this stormwater through Washington Park than the pipe could handle, without adding anything from Washington Park. So the flooding is on the streets. It's just a kind of god-awful mess. Now this fixes it, and it's taken a long time for the resources to come around to make this happen, but I'm quite sympathetic that this $1 million plus adventure by the property owner to move the stormwater over is absolutely fantastic improvement for the Washington Park neighborhood. It's also provides better stormwater quality for all of us that live in Delaware and for the Delaware River itself. So the stormwater pond's a good thing. The removal of the other pond, if it wants to turn into a parking lot, that's certainly a matter of right under the zoning code.
Any thoughts about the removal of the ornamental fence and the placement of the new fence, and any thought about the landscape plan?
The landscape plan is beautiful. Well, Mr. Bertram's a pro. It's really going to do what it sets out to do. I can't imagine it's just not going to be beautiful even before the little enhancements they've agreed to. It'll stop the noise. It'll stop some of the light pollution coming off the site. They've, of course, already adjusted the parking lights. I think themselves are working on it. So it's that part of it is beneficial. I don't have much to say. I don't live there, but this parking lot's a matter of right. They did not have to move the stormwater pond, and they chose to expend a huge amount of resources to do that. And I can't imagine a better outcome than this proposal.
I asked you about the fence, the ornamental fence on Johnson Way. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, that would be uncharacteristic of all the other properties in the park. If you drive through the park, you can see that Mr. McConnell has addressed some kinds of landscaping through a selection of trees and shrubbery that are to make this park stand out from other industrial parks in the area. However, what happened in 2004 in Ordinance 490 was beyond my ken as to its appropriateness. But this it hasn't been a problem very much. But this is a good solution for this particular property, and it'll complete this park.
And finally, do you have any other concerns about the alternative that they've presented tonight, and or any input that you've received directly or indirectly from neighbors?
Well, I spent a bunch of time talking to the neighbors, but of course, you know, their concerns are most properly addressed by McConnell Development and their experts. We did talk a lot about what's going on. I showed people in the park plans, and we got them in contact with the McConnell and their employees. But I don't have an opinion as to whether this is the most beautiful thing in the world. However, I go there regularly and I look and imagine where the fence is, look at the plans, and this is going to be quite an improvement.
Let me rephrase my other part of my question, because you didn't answer it.
No, sorry, sir.
And have neighbors been in touch with you after this plan has been developed and or shared and discussed with the neighbors? Have you recently received any additional complaints, concerns, or anything of that nature?
I don't recall any. It went from quite a bunch of a concern down to a very minor amount. Haven't talked to anyone for over 3 weeks.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Lasko or Mr. Athey, any questions for Mr. Bergstrom?
None from me.
No, thank you, none.
Okay. All right. Mr. Tucker, I have one last question for you that I meant to ask. You said you've got a private agreement with some of the neighbors, et cetera. Does that include all of the neighbors that are adjacent, whether you've been in touch with them or not? Will they benefit similarly?
Mayor, yes, we've offered to anybody in Washington the ability to sign up to this private agreement. Obviously, because of COVID, it's been a little challenging, but I sent out FedEx letters to all the immediate adjoiners, and that led to certain people contacting us and certain leadership in the community. So we've been dealing with a couple of folks over the past month or so, and everybody who wants to be part of the private agreement can be. I've shared the bullet points of that private agreement with neighborhood leadership, and that includes, as I mentioned, the maintenance agreement in perpetuity, the replacement of trees up to 2 times a year during planting season, which of course is fall and spring, representation that Amazon will be reminded as many times as necessary that its employees cannot park in their community and walk to work, which we've heard happens sometimes, perhaps. We have an agreement in spirit and with bullet points. And again, anybody in the community that wants to be a party to that, we're willing to make them a party to that, so that we will have this contractual private obligation, not only an obligation for all of you.
Let me be more precise. How many adjacent property owners are there? How many of them have signed an agreement or reached agreement with you?
I believe there were 3 in particular that we will hear from tonight, or at least that will be mentioned tonight, that are in agreement with that approach. But until I hear it, I can't represent that with 100% certainty, but that is my understanding based on my latest communications.
All right, let me try this one more time, because I must not be explaining this correctly. As I look at the map, there are a number of parcels that are identified that are contiguous to the property. How many of those have you reached out to? How many of them got a FedEx? And in turn, how many of those have signed and returned an agreement to you?
I have no signed returned agreements. I had my paralegal send a letter out that I prepared to every residential park. And so to the best of my knowledge, that was done. We invited all the neighbors in that letter that were adjacent to let their other neighbors know about our outreach. Approximately a month and a half ago, a month ago, we had a meeting at the foot of West 13th Street that I would estimate was attended by about a dozen neighbors, where we talked about this alternative plan and the plantings. And to date, there have been 3 neighbors in particular that have continued to engage us. One in particular, who I believe is a community leader. And we have represented in an email to that community leader the bullet points of the agreement that we would be willing to enter into. And it is my understanding that from her that there is general agreement in the community to those bullet points, which I outlined just a few moments ago to the board. And with a positive result tonight, certainly we will formalize that as promised and as I have bullet pointed in writing to those neighbors.
So if some neighbor does not communicate with you, it's not as if they are not entitled to the benefits of any plan or any future plan that, or some of the things that you've laid out tonight. It's not that they have to separately agree with you.
That is correct. They will indirectly benefit from what their other neighbors have agreed to, and we'll certainly wait a couple of weeks before we finalize anything to allow further communication to go forward. And I'd certainly, of course, send out another letter to folks if the board was so inclined. And we should probably just do that now that I think about it, just to make sure folks know what the latest and greatest plan looks like. So I'll just represent to you that we'll do that we'll send out another round of letters so that make sure that everybody has the what I'll call the latest and greatest plan, including some private agreement items that go beyond even what you all saw tonight, just to clean that up. And I think that's an excellent point, Mayor.
Okay. Any last opportunities here for Mr. Athey or Mr. Lasko before we close out this part of the hearing?
None from me, Your Honor.
I'm good, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Mr. Tucker, thank you. Mr. Bergstrom, thank you. And all the other participants tonight. Appreciate that. Do we have, Kim, do we have anyone from the public that wishes to make a comment?
We did have one question on the chat that asked if we could outline the fence they were talking about. And I can bring that slide back up. And I think I saw it. I looked on the plan a little more closely with it. But if I bring that up, let me see.
I think that we sufficiently walked through that when we blew up the plan.
Yeah, Your Honor, that was like about an hour ago. I know it's from Mr. Gross. Whether he still wants to see that or not, I don't know. But I think we subsequently explained it.
Okay, well,
Okay.
I brought Mr. Gross into the meeting.
If you would not mind pulling it up, the fencing that would start, I assume, by Lot C, going around to where the return is on Lot A. I assume continuous run.
I think he's asking, is it a continuous fence?
Well, if you're asking the applicant, I'm happy to respond.
Yes, Mr. Tucker, please.
Thank you. It is a contiguous fence along the rear of the existing parking lot. And then on either end of that existing parking lot, to the north and the south, it tapers and wraps around and comes towards Johnson Way, approximately how many feet, Mr. Bergstrom? Bertram, sorry.
30 feet perhaps.
Approximately 30 feet on both sides of that existing parking area at a 45-degree angle.
Going through Lot B and C to the ponds and covering the pond area.
No, it does not cover
No.
the pond area.
No, it wraps around Lot B only.
That is correct.
And the only reason why I brought that up is because if there will be no fencing, I just see it as a safety issue because kids like cutting through yards and playing in forbidden areas. And I just see that a pond, a retention pond, all kinds of things can be a future, basically a liability for everybody and a possible hurting of one of the kids. So I just was under the impression that not only were we looking for aesthetics to shield the neighborhood and buffer them with trees and the fence, but also as a continuous fence beginning by the ponds, going all the way around so there's no cut through, and also for safety of Amazon's employees' cars, from vandalism. There's separate properties and a neighborhood there. And I just feel that there should be, maybe not, the ornamental fence, but whatever fence that you and the neighbors have come up with, a beigey 6-foot vinyl fence. But I do believe that it should be consistent from end to end. So as far as the fence, that was just my way in.
Any other questions, Phil?
Yeah, one, I guess what bugs me, and I'm dovetailing the Honorable Mayor Caranta with the agreements with, say, 3 neighbors. One supposedly speaks for everybody, but if you have 20 or 25 residents that back there, and you've confirmed 3 and have signed private agreements, which for the life of me, I don't understand why there would be a need for private agreement versus an agreement for the whole neighborhood and the benefit of the whole neighborhood and made public. I just, again, when I don't know what's going on, I just jump to the impropriety fallback position. So it just kind of scares me. And last but not least,
Hold on one second. Hold on. So, Mr. Tucker, you want to respond to that question first with that comment?
Or if I can, I'm taking some notes. So the COVID situation did present a challenge. I would normally want to meet with folks, and we would set up a meeting at a location nearby, maybe a fire hall or school, to talk about our plans. That just was not feasible in these circumstances. So I personally recommended to my client that we reach out to the immediate neighbors via FedEx because they were the ones most impacted, certainly visually. None of this planting on B or C, on C is code required, as we had mentioned in our presentation. Some of it is code required on B, but certainly not the fencing. And so we reached out. We were very clear in the letter, which I'm happy to follow up and provide to the board tomorrow. Please reach out or notify your other neighbors. If they want to be involved in this, we're happy to do that. We had never proposed, just so the record's clear, to put fencing in around the ponds. In fact, Mr. Athey may know this, DNREC discourages that practice.
Right.
And the reason is, well, what apparently the concern is, and it makes sense when you hear it, is that children are very good at climbing fences, but larger adults like me are not. And so you will have a child, I guess this is the theory that as I understand it, you could have a child get over a fence, but an adult can't get in quickly to perhaps save the child. So what we do is we design these ponds with benches. And so there's a certain number of feet in that pond where if a child were to fall in, they would not drown because it's benched maybe a foot or two, 1 foot, I believe Mr. Ziegler's pointing out to me. And so that's there to address that very legitimate safety concern. But you won't find ponds anywhere in Newcastle County where DNREC has, to the best of my knowledge, has required fencing. I have seen some people put it in like around maybe a restaurant or something like that. So that's how safety is addressed. And again, this pond has to be built and is being built pursuant to an approved DNREC plan. We did double up on the trees once we left the fenced in area across parcel C to help address the visual, the buffering, so to make up for the lack of a fence. Obviously a fence is also far more expensive in many ways. And we used it only where the existing parking is in the rear because we were very limited in space because of the easement where the stormwater management pond runs between the residential and our client's property. We had to stay out of there. So we had to use two methods. We had to use plants and a fence there because of how tight the lines were. But as we grew into Lot C, obviously we had more room to maneuver with double row trees. So that's why you see that evolution. In all versions of our draft alternative plan, and none of those, I should say, did we suggest or propose fencing along the entire property line. I understand certainly why some people may be asking for it, but also keep in mind virtually every one of those properties that immediately back up to our client's land as you go on to parcel C, not all of them, but I think almost every one had fences in their backyards as well. Their own private fence.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Gross, any other questions?
yeah, I guess as a suggestion for your notes with the residents, in that final letter of FedEx, maybe put in there, just as all meetings are being held, offer them 2 specific dates and days, maybe a weekday and a weekend, where you can do a Zoom meeting, even if 1 or 2 more show, just you have a consensus, and a year from now someone doesn't hear, oh, well, they agreed to that. Well, you were given every opportunity and we didn't hear from you. But just to keep everybody happy, since that first phase did not need approval, their woods disappeared. You started off with enemies. It's just like you're doing, make nice, and do what you can, as well as with the trees. I know you said at the last meeting that you were going to put more trees, but you did not put them on the plan. I guess the board can only take you at your word and your reputation that you'll make sure it's good enough and works for everybody.
Well,
Thank
it's certainly in writing, and I'm happy to forward it to you as well, sir, certainly, Mr. Gross.
Yep. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kim, are there any other members of the public that wish to comment or ask questions?
Sorry,
Kim?
I have a hand raised from Angela. I'm going to bring her in.
Okay, Angela, what's in? I'm sorry, is this Ms. Quinn?
It is.
Good. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Floor is yours.
Thank you as well. Could I just have a little bit of background? I'm sorry. I knew that this was supposed to be the mayor, the solicitor, and the engineer, but we have 4 gentlemen on the call, so I wasn't sure of each one's role besides obviously Mr. Bergstrom and Mr. Corintha.
Right, so you're in the midst of a hearing, so it's a formal
I
proceeding.
understand that, yes.
Okay, and so you've got the attorney, Mr. Tucker, for the applicant, in this case, McConnell Development. And then, I'm sorry, Angela, explain who else needs to be identified for you?
So who is Mr. Lasco and who is Mr. Ace?
Oh, okay, so there's the Board of Adjustment has 3 members. It's chaired by the mayor. It's also the city engineer, Mr. Athey, and the city solicitor / city attorney, that's Mr. Lasco. And they are those are the 3 voting members according to the city charter.
Okay. So initially I had sent a great deal of emails to Linda Radford. I believe you were also copied. Mr. Bergstrom was also part of those when all of this construction began. So I've been talking to Mr. Tucker. After the FedEx went out, I did not receive the FedEx. It was from one of the neighbors that shared it with me. So sort of in order to speak to Mr. Gross as well, this is the way that it came about. I was just informed by some of the other neighbors. We got together, we did go door to door after that to make sure that other neighbors were involved in this process. Since then, we've come up with a couple of different plans having to do with the landscaping, which I think would obviously benefit the neighborhood because right now there's nothing. And I think that most of you have actually driven out to the property and seen that there, is no vegetation left. It's clear cut. So the new pond is there. We're hoping to get some new trees planted around there. They're going to be fast growing trees. The additions to the landscaping are what Mr. Tucker had expressed earlier. At the end of 13th Street, there will be a couple of trees planted there as well to sort of block off the end of the street once the light pole is removed. The fencing was also something that's of interest because it's at the end of the parking lot, and we had spoken about some of the light pollution, sound pollution with the vehicles using their alarms in order to locate them in the morning at the beginning of their shift, because they're obviously all the same vehicle. So we've had several conversations and, definitely ended another conversation today via email. So I would support that the variances would be granted in terms of the fence is of a little help to us at the front of Johnson Way, but the trees and the vegetation to be planted at the back of existing parking lot B and where the existing pond is, along with the new pond, I think would greatly benefit the neighborhood. It's an issue of property value. It's an issue of privacy. We didn't used to be able to, and you can see from slide 3, that there used to be trees throughout the entire property. So we had no view whatsoever of any of the buildings on Johnson Way or throughout the industrial park. So surprise, there's an industrial park at the back of the property. But, for all intents and purposes of this meeting and being granted the variance in order to plant trees, in order to give us a little bit more of a curtain of privacy, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And if Mr. Tucker and Mr. McConnell are still willing to work with us in the neighborhood, we're taking that good faith that they're going to be, updating the landscaping plan accordingly, which has already happened a couple of times. I don't know if that needs to be resubmitted to the Board of Adjustment as well, but we're supporting the fact that they would like to give us some of the landscaping that would be required for the by right plan.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments, Ms. Quinn?
Did you have any questions for me? I think that I've been the most vocal out of the neighborhood and written enough emails, etc.
Sure. So I have one, and I asked Mr. Tucker this. Perhaps you have greater insight as I look at the map and I look at
Yeah.
the adjacent property owners. In your estimation, how many of them have been engaged? How many of them have been informed? Can you give us some sense of, is everybody pretty much on the same page, or is there any widespread disagreement, or maybe some apathy, or people just aren't engaged? How would you describe kind of the tone of the neighbors, please?
So I would say that there is a great deal of upset, obviously, because this was something that the neighbors didn't have any notice of. And so once the heavy equipment came in and the ground was shaking and all of the trees were being uprooted and removed, it's a traumatic experience to go through when you're not expecting something like that to be happening immediately adjacent to your home. Mr. Preby is right at the end of 13th Street and is essentially a retiree that moved here, a couple of years ago. So, this was the place that he and his wife had chosen in order to retire. So very upsetting to have all of the trees removed. His immediate neighbors, we spoke with Lottie Waters earlier this week. Ms. Hainsworth has been involved in just going around the industrial or around the cul-de-sac. We spoke with the D'Angelos. We left a note, I think, at the Newtons. Mr. Halco met with us at the end of the street, which is what Mr. Tucker had referenced. Not sure about the Coppolas. We spoke with Miss Waterloo, and I think that we probably stopped there. We went door to door and just left notice that the meeting was going to be occurring with Mr. Tucker and the landscape architect and the engineer in order to just go over what the changes were. The fact that the pipeline had been placed, which, obviously when this began, we didn't know what the purpose of ripping out all the trees was going to be. Since then, within the last couple of weeks when we had the major storm, we spoke with Mr. Bergstrom because we did have a great deal of rainwater, which I'm sure that everyone is aware of. So the probability that the flooding or whatever was supposed to have been occurring from 14th Street now being alleviated because we have this wonderful new drainage pond hasn't quite come to fruition yet. And we were told that that's because not everything, I guess, is in service at this point in time. So that's definitely a concern for us as the neighbors aside from that, but that's not what we're talking about today. But we've informed most of the neighbors up and down 13th Street, around 12th Street, and then ending right around Juniper.
So Angela, let me ask you to pause there for a minute. Mr. Bergstrom or Mr. Tucker, or perhaps both, can you respond to Ms. Quinn's comments about the water remediation, the status of that, and is all of it in service, or are there other pieces of it that are in process? And if so, what's the timing of all that, please? Let's start with Mr. Bergstrom first, and then we'll go Mr. Tucker, or Mr. Tucker if you want to ask the engineer. So Jeff, your reactions to that, please, or what are your views?
The project's almost fully functional. Not perfectly yet, but almost fully functional. The amount of water is just that doesn't go through the Washington Park is just a mathematical concept. You can watch it flowing out of the 5-foot diameter pipe at the pond if you care to take a look at it in the storm. That's water that does not go into Washington Park now. 17 acres.
Okay, but is what remains to be completed, and will that have a further positive water remediation effect on the neighbors, or what remains to be completed, will that have no material effect on water remediation?
I think I can answer that. The pond right now is functioning as a sediment basin. It is on the The new storm sewer has been constructed and is draining into the basin, so the water has been diverted away from Washington Park. And in the very near future, it will be fully converted to a functional stormwater management basin. But right now, it's functioning also as a sediment basin.
So in non-engineering speak and layperson's terms, let me take a shot at this one more time. So does that mean that there will be less water backing up in the backyards or on the streets in Washington Park? Or what we've seen recently is probably the end result of this project?
There will be less water. There will be less water. We had, I think a week and a half ago, a 25 to 50-year storm around Newcastle. And then on Friday night, we had another substantial storm. So they were two very significant storms. And I know the one on Friday night was rated as a 1,000-year storm in Hockessin. And I don't believe any area, any adjacent property was flooded or impacted by it. So I think that it's already an improvement. And when it's fully converted, it will be a 100% improvement. So it's 9% functional now.
Thank you. Mr. Bergstrom, any final thoughts from you?
Nope.
Okay. Ms. Quinn, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up that you'd like to ask based on the answers you just heard?
It was just more of an addendum because, Mr. Bergstrom had said that he hadn't heard from us in quite some time. So I just wanted to ensure that he remembered that we had actually spoken a few weeks ago when we had the storm. And he's spoken with my husband multiple times when he brought the plans out and then when this rainstorm occurred.
Yes,
Good. Thank you.
but several weeks ago.
Last week.
So yes,
Mayor.
that does answer my question.
Mr. Mayor, it's Dan Lasco. I have a question for Ms. Quinn, if she's still there.
I'm here.
Ms. Quinn, is there a civic association or other organized community association in Washington Park?
Not that I know of, no.
You may want to consider that as you negotiate your maintenance agreement.
Yes, we're trying to keep in mind what it is that we actually want to occur and trying to ensure that the covenant actually runs with the land should the McConnells no longer own the property, et cetera. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Lasco. Okay. Mr. Athey, anything or no?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Quinn, any other thoughts, comments, or questions?
No, I think that was everything I needed to say. Thank you.
All right. And let me thank you for your participation. Thank you for checking in on the neighbors and engaging thoughtfully with the McConnell folks and their representatives. I certainly appreciate that on behalf of the community and the neighbors. And we can't be everywhere, but through good works of people like you, it's helpful to have your efforts. So I thank you publicly for jumping in on this and to your spouse. But we're going to assume for the time being that you did the heavy lifting.
He's more the door-to-door and I'm more the power of the pen.
There you go. All right. Very good. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Kim, is there anybody else that has any other public questions or comments?
I don't see any other hands raised. Let me just double check the chat. No, I don't think there's no other questions.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn a business meeting?
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
The hearing is hereby closed. And so we will begin the business part of this meeting with a discussion. And let me begin with Mr. Lasco, then Mr. Athey, and then I'll add my comments. So Mr. Lasco, your thoughts and your thoughts.
All right. I'll start with, it's a variance application. What we should be looking at is the quick check standard and our own code standard. I think Mr. Tucker in his memorandum has addressed them fairly well. So here's my thinking on this. The nature of the zone here, it is an industrial, of course. The character of the immediate vicinity to the rear or to the east, so to speak, is residential. The rest of it's facing an industrial park, fully developed, that doesn't have these ornamental fences in the front or the landscaping that goes with it. And so I don't think that we're talking about seriously affecting the rest of the industrial park if this ornamental fencing is eliminated from the front of Lot A. In fact, this is one of those rare cases where the variance request is win-win-win on multiple fronts. It improves drainage, it improves screening, it suppresses noise, it provides enhanced parking for the tenant. It works all the way around as far as I can see. I think the fencing at the rear of Lot A, in the fashion that has been described, opaque fencing, off, not white, but some off tone, wood tone, with the supplemental landscaping of evergreen will be excellent to provide that kind of screening and much more effective than in the front of the lot. I think the other landscaping that's provided in the direction of Lot C and Lot B is icing on the cake, really. It's not required by code. But it is something that I think will provide the adequate buffer and the necessary buffer for the residents in Washington Park. And at the same time, it should improve their drainage, and that seems to be the evidence. So I think looking at the city standards, I don't think we're granting any special privilege to the applicant. All the other industrial park owners weren't required to put up this ornamental fencing in front. This industrial park largely predates this 2004 code amendment. I don't think that we're not giving them any special privileges there. I don't think the need for the variance arises from any actions of the applicant. It is what it is. The property's out there, the drainage is bad, and they're doing something to fix it. And I think that a literal interpretation of the chapter would deprive the applicant of rights enjoyed by other properties in the same district. If you're talking about the hardship or the exceptional practical difficulty standard, that I think was the most challenging part of the legal standard to address. But the description of the problem with the fencing along Johnson Way as interfering with existing utility lines, the evidence is that there is heavy utility lines there, or moving the fencing backward, interfering with snow plowing efforts, I think creates the reasonable, exceptional, practical difficulty that justifies the variance. So I will be supporting both variance applications. I would only suggest that it be conditioned on the implementation of the alternate landscaping plan as submitted by the applicant tonight. So that's a long-winded way of saying I support the application.
Very good. All right, Mr. Athey, your comments, please.
I can be maybe slightly more short-winded, more or less reaching the same conclusion a slightly different way. So definitely want to recognize that's been brought up a number of times. I mean, the drainage issues in Washington Park are pretty well known. That's why I kind of asked Mr. Ziegler on the record to state some of the way the storm basin was designed. Yeah, I think everybody in the meeting here would agree that the alternative planning plan is probably better, certainly for the residents of Washington Park. Certainly agree that the fence would be out of place in Center Point. But frankly, I'm still a little uncomfortable with this, and I don't know how many board meetings occur without me using the word precedent. And so I'm going to use it again here, that I think this is potentially that proverbial slippery slope a little bit. In this case, the applicant, in some ways, is just essentially saying we think that the alternative plan is better than the by right plan. They think the code, the 4-inch caliper is incorrect, and I looked into that, and I think that's a valid concern, maybe something the city should look at a little bit more. But again, I always worry about precedent, and to me, we're kind of cracking the door to somebody coming in later and saying, well, I have a professional that says, you know, this or that, and I think this, you know, the code is not right, or I can do a better job, and it could put this board or a future board in a little bit of a tough spot. In this case, I agree with the applicant
what they're proposing is better. But again, back to that precedent thing. So my comfort level's not super strong here. All that being said, though, I think the thing I can really hang my hat on is, was Mr. Mayor, your point to get it on the record that this provision of the code was put into place in 2004. So in many ways, this is not dissimilar from things that the board does here fairly often. More typically, it's a parcel or a house that was built like a century ago, now trying to conform to the code. This is essentially the same thing, just on a much more recent time frame. I also, Mr. Lasko referenced the hardship. The hardship is not defined in the code, and in a way you can almost kind of twist that and say, by not approving the variance, we could be creating a hardship, not on the applicant though, but on the Washington Park residents who clearly would be benefiting from this alternative way to look at it. And of course, it also says that we should not approve any variances that would be contrary to the public interest. So again, kind of twisting that one a little bit. By not approving this, it probably would be contrary to the public interest. So in a way, you have to, it's kind of an interpretive way to look at it. But again, I really go back to that 2004 thing. You know, sooner or later, you got to let common sense and just practical judgment follow. Again, I'll say it one last time. I am worried about the precedent here. But based on everything that was presented tonight, I intend to support the variance and absolutely think it ought to be conditioned on, and I think we did this at the last board meeting, a landscape plan being approved by Mr. Bergstrom as a condition of that variance. So again, bottom line is I intend to support both variances. Thank you, Your Honor.
Very good. Thank you very much. My own thoughts are the following. I think the tests, the quick check case have been met. I think the alternative plan is far superior. I'm actually encouraged to hear that those neighbors that have been engaged find it far improved from that which the by right plan suggested. I would say to the city council, the city solicitor, in recommendation to the city council, we ought to take a close look at that 2004 code and make some necessary changes, because I think that would, one, go a long way to solve and maybe assuage some of Mr. Athey's expressed concerns. It's clear that we've got some provisions in there that perhaps were intended for residential area parking lots and not necessarily parking lots in an industrial zone. I'm going to support both variances. I do think that to me, I think the benefit to the neighborhood in terms of the water remediation is long overdue, and I think for that reason alone, I mean, this is enormously important. I've lived before in a place where water was a problem, and it's a headache that if you have not lived in a home with a basement that's been full of water, I can't even begin to describe to you the distress and loss and challenges that all of that presents. And so for that reason, boy, this is a vast improvement. It may not be perfect, but it's a substantial improvement from where we've been in the past. And so I find that very good. I will also, though, in my when we offer a motion here, I am going to stipulate, and I think Mr. Tucker already agreed to this. I think we ought to be very deliberative about identifying each of those, what appears to be, looks like 8 or 9 property owners, maybe there might be 10, but I think that we ought to be very deliberative about sending them something, some communication to give them a sense of what the status of things are, and that that they are entitled to a benefit here that's going to be implemented, and that they have only another opportunity or two in the very in a very short period of time for which to express any final thoughts or communications, because if not, I know that I can imagine that the applicant is probably anxious to complete the work, and I'm sure the neighbors would probably be happy to have them complete the work and move all the machinery and everything out of the area as well. So with that, that concludes my comments. At this point, I will entertain a motion to address the disposition of the application before us.
Dan, you want to do that, or?
All right, I'll take a stab. I make the motion to approve both variances conditioned upon implementation of the landscaping plan submitted by the applicant tonight in substantial form approved by Mr. Bergstrom. And I say in substantial form because I understand it may be augmented by additional trees. So we'll let Mr. Bergstrom be the final arbiter of that in this motion here.
Before I second that, just clarification, you use the word implement. To me, that means they have to actually start planting. I would be equally comfortable with just approval of a plan. I think that would probably get into some timing issues. I know Mr. Tucker talked about when Amazon needs the lot, and I know you don't want to do some landscaping in certain times of the year. So did you specifically mean implement, or are you okay with alternate language?
If you have a suggestion, I'll listen to it. I mean, implementation doesn't mean instant implementation. In the ordinary course of constructing the site, they'll implement it at the appropriate planning time. That's what I assumed. But if you've got a suggestion for an amendment, I'd entertain it.
I was just going to make it upon approval of the landscape plan by Mr. Bergstrom. Maybe we're splitting hairs at this point.
Do you want to restate it as a whole so we can know what we're voting on?
Okay, then I would say I will move that we approve both variances as presented this evening, conditioned upon approval of a alternate landscape plan by the building official, Mr. Bergstrom.
Substantially in conformance with what has been submitted tonight?
Thank you very much. Substantially in conformance with the alternative plan that was presented here this evening.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion and second yours.
Very good.
And I would make an amendment to that and add that the applicant further agrees to communicate with adjacent property owners in Washington Park and provide them with sufficient updates and an opportunity to comment on the plan and any private agreements that might need their consideration.
I agree with the spirit of that, but I don't, whereas the other condition is very, basically black and white. Either they've gotten it approved or they haven't. It seems like there's some subjectivity, Your Honor, with your condition. Could you perhaps make that more, specific, contact each and every homeowner, or give, a homeowner that abuts the property or something with more specificity?
Yeah, it's adjacent property owners
Okay.
in Washington Park. Those
Okay.
residential. I mean, I'm not interested in having McConnell Development speak with other the Postal Service or anybody else. What I'm really interested in is the Washington Park neighbors that have properties that are adjacent to the landscape plan that's been presented to us tonight. It appears that there's maybe about 10, and that they in a very timely manner update them as to the plans going forward, and then if they have any other comments or whatever, provide them with an opportunity or two to make any final comments, and then draw the whole conversation to a close.
Okay, if I missed, if you used the word adjacent the first time and I missed it, my apologies. Dan.
I think the waters have gotten awful muddy here. I don't know what the motion is exactly. Can I just suggest this, that we not amend the motion further? Mr. Bergstrom knows that this community is very interested in this landscape plan. I'm sure he's going to dialogue with them and communicate with them before anything gets the thumbs up. Fair enough?
Mr. Bergstrom?
That would be very logical.
I will
Okay,
be
so
I will be sitting in your office should you not do that. Thank you. Okay, and in that case, then I will withdraw my motion,
or your amendment to my motion.
my amendment to the motion, right?
Right.
Okay,
And
so
I will second Mr. Athey's motion.
Mr. Lasko may have already done so, but while
Yeah.
to Kathy to sort that out in the minutes.
All right.
All right.
All right, then we'll take a vote. Mr. Lasko, your vote, please.
I vote in favor of the motion for all the reasons I described in my prior statement.
Mr. Athey.
I vote in favor of the motion for all the reasons I described in my statement.
And similarly, I vote for the motion for all the reasons I previously stated. The chair will thank you for everybody's patience here tonight. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, thank you very much. So moved. We are adjourned. Thank you very much,
Okay,
everybody.
thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.